Okay, great. Thanks everyone for coming today to our Tuesday Tech Talk at Pivotal Labs. I'm Hetty and I help coordinate Pivotal Labs. If you're not familiar with the space, it's like a software consulting company, and we'd be happy to talk to you about it if you have any questions after. But right now we're going to hear from Dazza Greenwood. Did I say that right?
Yes, you did.
Awesome. So Dazza is a founder of Civics.com, which is a boutique provider of professional consultancy services for digital business and trust networks. So Civics.com enables organizations to deploy cross-boundary data flows, transactions, and other services using an integrated business, legal, and technical architecture and design methodology. So engagements are tailored to purpose and leverage innovative solutions for digital identity, data policy, and technology strategy. A little background is at MIT since 1997, Dazza held various academic and research appointments, including visiting scholar, lecturer, and scientist. And Dazza developed repeatable methods for integrated business, legal, and technical design and development of systems or services that were honed over decades of private consulting and released under open MIT licenses. Currently, at the MIT Media Lab, Dazza's research focus is on integrated legal and technical code, enabling trusted identities in the cyberspace, reliable big data analytics, and legitimately fair personal data sharing. So that's a good start for the intro. And so he's going to get started by telling us about his most recent project. Hack.
Hack.
And it seems like your mic might not be on just yet. And then after that, we'll have some time for Q&A.
Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
Great. So this is a project that is open source and I'd say very exploratory from the MIT Media Lab that we're calling iAuth. It's a project that is grown out of the research work of Professor Sandy Pentland, who runs the Human Dynamics Lab, and basically the focus is on use of big data to gain insight, especially into human behavior in groups, population, and trends. So you could think of it sort of like using epidemiological techniques or almost advertising techniques, but let's just say from a approach that he calls reality mining. So we like real-time data, and we especially like data from individuals. So unlike most social sciences, which are definitely quantitative, when I was an undergraduate, like I had clipboard and surveys for like Psych 101, and we had in economics I did regression analysis. Certainly quantitative. The difference here is that the types of statistical models and analytics are more like what we would think of as modern data science, and less, and then specifically based on the models like machine learning are derived from the data directly and not from an assumption, like a rational actor in economics, or we say a psychological model, like Freudian or something. So that's why we like the data right from the people. We like individually identifiable data, which also is somewhat shunned in social sciences. Typically, for research, the game is about anonymization and aggregation and perturbing the data so that individuals are not identifiable. So just to give some context for this iAuth app, the project that started it was in the Media Lab, where I spent part of my time as a researcher, not the Civics.com consulting that Hetty mentioned. In the Media Lab, DARPA granted a project to Professor Pentland's group to develop a method for the Pentagon to do a better job in identifying vets returning from the wars who were suffering from depression and post-traumatic stress syndrome were the two key ones. And so they threw a lot of money at it in different ways, most of it more traditional clinical. Some of it went to Media Lab to do something more exploratory, and it was to basically work on a platform out of our lab called FUNF, which gets sensors, all the sensor readings from Android phones, and puts them in a nice single package that's easy to, work with, no wrangling needed, and from that, it turned out that it was demonstrated that it was possible to have a very high degree of predictive confidence when depression or post-traumatic stress syndrome were present. And that's partly because these are behavioral. They're based upon observation. There's no blood test. And the phones are really good at creating and preserving and transmitting data about behavior. So, for example, if you think, at no point did we get the payload of email, for example, or text, but just the metadata, showing patterns of contacts with others is extremely telling about people's mindset and how they're doing and kind of their trajectory in a social environment. GPS is great to see a great deal, and accelerometers and gyroscopes can tell you a lot about how people are walking. With early onset of Alzheimer's, that's another important area. Slight changes in the way people walk. The way people walk is very signature. Can be a very good indicator of early onset dementia or Alzheimer's. This can be picked up with the accelerometers and gyroscopes and phones very easily. Similarly for the DARPA study, when people are not leaving the house so much, when they're not communicating as much with other people, as you can tell from the metadata and some other tells like that, a fairly thin slice of the data turned out to be very predictive. So the game that I was playing as a former lawyer in this project was basically all about how does one have a valid, legitimate method for the Pentagon to get incredibly intimate data about that's after they're back from the work. In some cases, they'd be civilians at that point. I mean, it almost sounds like the kind of thing that you wouldn't want, in like some dystopia where the government has a whole bunch of information about everybody, and they're trying to help us. And so that was a pickle, and it required some really deep thinking. And eventually, we basically embraced, again, an idea from Sandy Pentland, which is what he calls a new deal on data. And the vision is that in order to get the most out of the potential of big data, we need to use individually identifiable data. That's a big part of it, in fact. And the only way to do that legitimately is where people own and control their own personal data. Radical though that may sound by today's standards, where almost all of our data is fractured across third-party systems. And very literally, when we click the buttons accepting terms and conditions, we are assigning, transferring ownership, or the equivalent of ownership rights. And we can't really track where it is. We're not sure who's looking at it or what's being done with it from that point forward, nor are we necessarily sharing in like a fair value exchange. And more to the point, it's kind of quicksand for the companies and government agencies that are relying on it. It's hard to, if you haven't been on the other side of that many times, it can be hard to get behind bold, heavy-duty action premised on personal data that maybe has iffy legal or political basis to have, because you're never sure where a bad headline or a lawsuit or a political dust-up is going to come with personal data. It's like, it can be like a third rail. So what's truly needed to transition to make the most of big data, to really come to a digital footing in the economy, like big, as well as for every company, is to be able to have a legit basis. A new deal on data provides that. And it's actually not so different from the laws in Europe, where people have deep rights to the personal data. We don't have a privacy directive like Europe. And so what we did for the DARPA project, what I did was came up with a contract-based framework. So basically, every party in the contracts had a legally enforceable by contract even playing field that reflected similar rights to the fair information practices, the kind of rights you get if you say you had HIPAA covered data or school records. The school can't just give your transcript to anybody, or your disciplinary record requires consent. Same with your medical records. Same with bank, Fair Credit Reporting Act, financial privacy, and turns out it's the same with quite a few bodies of records in the United States. Since Nixon sort of implosion, there 74 onward for several years, we had quite a blossom of privacy laws that were actually similar or better, in my view, than the current European privacy laws, giving people very complete rights to their personal data in terms of control, knowing where it is, being able to ask for a copy of it, being able to If there's something inaccurate, basically correct the record. And all these are basically good information hygiene. So printing from some of these fundamental rights, fair information practices they're called, or the wrapper that we use in Sandy's lab is a new deal on data. It's actually a pretty old deal on data. Every party agreed to those terms as though it was a statute, but they did it in contract. So as I was trying to figure out how to really do that so it wouldn't cost too much and it would reflect and support existing business practices and systems and the same technology that we're using already, it became clear very quickly that the pivotal point, if you will, was the OAuth 2 tokens. So it's that token exchange where all the action is. That's where you can get full alignment of the business, legal, and technical dimensions of the creation of new value, of the creation of a new asset class of personal data used in the aggregate to do some pretty important things, to save a lot of money, potentially make money, to make value. And it also aligns a point when an individual has given literal, direct, actual consent. If you think about it, when you see that little thing pop up, or if you're a developer and you created them, the action required is like a physical action. The user, like mouses or clicks, there's a user action required to consent to terms that the user sees. That's legit right there. The terms we see aren't always that terrific. Frequently they almost come across as an afterthought. I've been collecting them for years now and looking at them, and they're not always carefully construed or reviewed. But if you look at Facebook, Google for sure, Twitter, all the big companies, and many smaller companies like startups from our lab that do clinical use of data use in fund, for example, those terms are very heavily negotiated, and they exactly reflect what's in the contracts, and they absolutely reflect the fundamental business deal, the deal between the parties. I started realizing, okay, so first of all, for that DARPA thing, it's if you want to look at those contracts and the system rules, those are available for free. They're a bit heavy because the parties were kind of heavy. But the underlying design concept was good. I felt it had legs, so we kept noodling on it. And it was basically to come up with a simple, design pattern, a reusable design pattern that was generic, that would permit any company that was, let's call it a resource provider or an authorization provider, and any individual that was utilizing OAuth to grant access to protected resources, which is what it does, could basically know in advance that that would be the moment that you should be careful about the words, make sure they line up with the deals, and to be careful with logging so that everybody has a real log of what happened exactly, and to be careful with maintaining the endpoints so that if you, for example, do a token revocation, like we want that endpoint to know when a user has revoked authorization from either side. It's available if you look at Google or GitHub and others, like they will give you endpoints. So if you have an app and you revoke, and a user revokes authorization for your app with Google or GitHub, there's an endpoint that you could, if you cared to, let Google or GitHub know that the token's been revoked, that authorization's been revoked, and they will cancel it. A lot of times we don't necessarily do that because no one's asking us, and you think, so long as I separate the authorization on my side, we're good, right? Well, sure, and so long as we just use any sloppy words we want in that moment and the authorization we're good, right? Yeah, I guess. But the opportunity is to be a little bit better at that and to actually do 2 or 3 things right with logging authorization, logging revocation of authorization, and lining up the terms with the contracts and the deal. If we just take a little more care and involve business, legal, and technical people, just a little at the same time, not a lot, it's possible to unleash a major source of untapped value. Here's how. So I wanted to show you now something that we have. So this has been more or less an idea for like a couple of years with very not great prototypes and proofs of concept that have done with grad students or just whoever would, cared about it. No one's paying for this at this point, and so it's been hard to get things together. Thanks to Pivotal Labs and like doing a TED Talk on this, I was that can be very clarifying in the mind, thinking, well, gosh, what am I going to show? And so we have hacked something together up until the wee hours this morning, and by golly, I think it actually works. And to show you what we have done, we've got a Node app that demonstrates what we have. And so we just go to AppSheet for a moment. AppSheet, oh, and I should say, there's 2 volunteers here. So a lot of the work I do, you would call civic hacking. So someone from Code for America is here, and Massachusetts legal hackers are, I think, following online. And I just love hacking as a volunteer. A lot of good things can happen. Here's one of them. So AppSheet, who lives in India, was a participant in a January short course I did on blockchain and legal intensive. Gabriella, who is next to AppSheet here. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Gabriella also was a really great contributor and helped me run the class. She's here in Cambridge at this moment. So here's a couple. These are not MIT students, but they're behaving like great MIT students with the code. And actually, do you want me to just hit the video of the Node app that you brought together and then answer questions live?
Sure.
Okay, great. So because if you rely on a live demo from India, it will never work. We've taken the precaution of making this video. Of course, it is working now, but we've got the video, so let's play the video. Volume is quite soft. Can you hear that, Colin? Yeah. Why? Oh, okay. It's funny, it was live on my computer. Alrighty, so I think what I'll do is I'll just kind of talk you through it a little bit. So what you, is this one paused? Okay, yeah. So what you see here is a front screen of the app that we put together. It lets you log in with GitHub or with Google. Okay, the next thing we'll implement is logging with MIT, which also supports OAuth 2, now in addition to Kerberos, OpenID Connect specifically. What you have, yeah, good. So once you log in, yeah, there we go. Once you log in, you see a little screen that says, basically I've taken the permissions that you get and I put them at the top of like the user's profile. Okay. So if they want to know what they've agreed to, rather than digging for usually like a apps permissions page, it's under a settings page, it's under a account management page, it's under a preferences page, it's hard to find, frankly, for most people. Many people don't know it exists, that you can review the apps that have been authorized from a service. You just kind of put it right up front and center, and near the top of the page. And the idea is to see what it would be like to delete the terms and conditions, delete the privacy policy. I know it's scary, but recognize that they don't work. They're broken. People don't read them. If they did, they wouldn't necessarily be better off. They're hard to understand. They're hard to parse. I have trouble reading them. And replace it with something that could work. Something that could work could be something like what you see with a one-sentence, human-readable summary of an authorization that you can click on and understand more about the nature of the resource, and you can get paragraphs if you do click on those things. What you could do, and I've done this with some city clients in particular that are trying to have better plain language and understandable agreements for click-through for citizens, you can basically just bottom line the 2, 3, 4, 5 key terms. Like, we're not liable for anything. You own the data. You agree to share data with the following parties, and then plop in GitHub, plop in Evernote. As people agree to those permissions, you can have, in effect, a dynamic contract that actually does demonstrate the sum of the obligations of the parties at any given time. Because that's what happens when you look at the currently authorized apps. You should see a then current listing of the apps that you've authorized. Right? And when you revoke one, it disappears. So here is, this is basically a screen. Let me just back up for a moment and say, the architecture of this was absolutely not built so that we could just demonstrate something that we could demonstrate, with vaporware or PowerPoint slides. It was built to have 3 or 4 fundamental capabilities that should, in principle, be able to be standardized, formalized, built upon, and scaled because they have the right things, the right business, legal, and technical things. One of those things is a capability for people to, in a sense, own their own identity at some level. And so when I say own their own identity, I don't mean that if you're a bank or a company that they'll take over your account system, that would be bad. What I do mean is that at some point there's some source of identity, some credential that goes with that is theirs, that when they consent, they're doing so on their own behalf and not only as an employee through an X500 directory, some LDAP service through their employer, but not only in their capacity as a Google customer, but actually they themselves can consent. At some point, that's important. Like we consent to be governed, yet there's no mechanism for that. Consent is a two or more party transaction. I can't consent to myself. You need 2 different parties. So consenting from inside somebody's account system actually does not parse. It doesn't, it's illogical. Somehow people need to have an identity from which they identify themselves and can offer consent and can revoke consent meaningfully. Sometimes through no fault of our own, we don't revoke consent correctly. Like just hacking this app, we frequently thought we were deactivating things and disconnecting endpoints, and we hadn't. Being able to have people from a stand externally is important to keep everything honest and also for portability. So the way we do that is through a JSON file. So actually he was very, very patient with me, and he, instead of just having environmental conditions in Roku or putting things in a Mongo database as you normally would for an account system, and maybe having aspects of an account or a profile of the user just be dynamically generated from whatever you have laying around and not necessarily subject to a very high bar. We took a subset and said the account, the identity of the person is what exists in an account file. And that file is a JSON object, UTF-8 encoded, just right in the root of the server, or near, right on the server, in a directory where we're bringing it all. What that means is that at any given point, a person could look at their file, their account, and they could, JSON isn't particularly readable, but it's not unreadable, and it can certainly be arrayed. So people could see, oh, here's my name, here's my current authorizations, here's my address, here is my identity in a sense. And what we're doing with the apps for this is we're actually having people go for this service, we're having them go to a couple of different apps. One of them is Google, another one's a Node service. We don't really want Google to own the identity of our people. We don't also want to run an entire identity service for these apps. So what we're doing is we're encapsulating identity in a UTF-8 encoded file. And guess what? Now you get portability. So this is hard with identity systems, to think of portability across domains. It can be tricky. There's a lot of ways to do it that are inefficient and hard to understand. I can tell you firsthand. But this may be a simpler way, which is if you had a system of identity as consumers, citizens, that was encased in an account file that represented your identity, your core identity, your root identity, and you wanted to go, say, from Google hosting it to doing it on your own service or some MIT, ACLU service, whatever, some identity RS service, you can port it. You can move the file, keep a system of pointers so people know where that file is. They can always have a non-authoritative source in more performant, data-driven, systems. But the authoritative source of the data, the account file, can literally be a hashed, secure, publicly verifiable file that you could read, know, have, own. You can own your own identity and be a free person that is capable, again, of consenting to be governed, for example. You can, and here's how. So that's one of the features. Second thing is, and it's working, which is the most remarkable part. It's funny, we forget how to make file, modify file, because it gets buried in these frameworks, and the complexity is hidden. And so this is just like we're moving from Heroku to Ubuntu next on AWS and a mirror server in the Media Lab. And I'm really thinking, wow, it's terrific to go back to the primitives and the rudiments of just create file, modify file, and not being lost in frameworks that disintermediate us from fundamentally what's happening with the authoritative data. So for some things, that's okay for a lot of things. It's simple and it's faster. For certain things, it may be better to go to the old ways, like change mod and like an actual file that in a sense is authoritative. Here is an example of how people add accounts, and yep, there we go. There's the authoritative file. And when so right now I think she has done a really terrific job after some back and forth, but he just represents them from the services that we currently have registered, which is GitHub and Google. You can see like true or false. And so the true ones are the ones that are currently authorized. We have precisely one scope for each service, which is login. The next step on the roadmap you'll hear in a moment will be to bring on a few more scopes, like give me a copy of my account file. So that's create a post. It's basically make a commit in a repository, or put something in Drive, for example, the corresponding scopes. We will bring on MIT shortly. That will be a third. And because we're really relying on OpenID Connect design for OAuth 2, it's not just OAuth 2. That leaves most things to your imagination. OpenID Connect is a slightly more defined extension of OAuth 2 that includes a concept of certain endpoints and certain common claims for more enterprise facing, but it still works perfectly well for individuals. So we're using OpenID Connect version of OAuth 2, totally backward compliant. So any OAuth 2 thing that you guys are doing, what clients are doing, does not break when you add OpenID Connect. What you do get, however, is, for example, the dynamic registration of services the same way across infinitely scalable networks, and the ability to propagate types of registries needed to see. In our case, if now we have, say, 50 providers that we allow, and another iAuth provider has, say, 75, that is absolutely knowable at endpoints, that can stay in sync in ways that I won't get into right now. Okay, so let's go forward. Deactivate is critical. Consent is meaningless unless you can revoke consent. Just leave it right there. I'd say if there's 3 words that I would use for the design mantra, it would be number 1, interoperability, or almost like a framework and technology agnosticism, which is why it is we are utilizing things that you could implement the same way in Python and Django or in Node or elsewhere. It's UTF-8 encoded JSON files, the authoritative source. We keep the authorizations in a certain directory that's expected. A few other things like that. So I'd say that's for maximum interoperability, but mostly agnosticism to whatever technologies and stacks people want to use. That's really up to them. Number 2, it is just more how if you configure it a certain way, you can get certain advantages, engineering advantage over identity. Number 2, I'd say, is extensibility, and by that what I mean is if people are adding on, say, in their agreements, login with GitHub and Google today, tomorrow there could be, like Schmooggle or whatever, some other thing that we don't know about now. Just merely by onboarding, as you normally do in your business, your contract terms can now keep pace. By modularizing and encapsulating legal content, we can now begin to engineer legal content so that it cannot be so chaotic and such feels like a quicksand sometimes. That some of this can be engineered through workflow. So the extensibility allows you to basically extend the terms, but also the parties, just like snapping in a new service to a good service bus. You don't have to re-engineer the service. Same with the law. So it's extensible with the legal terms. It's extensible with the technical service. It's just OAuth 2. And the final one I'd say is portability. So we've got, by that I mean literally a user can now, finally, consider the account file something that is theirs, truly theirs, that is merely hosted by a steward, and that they can take from one provider to another. So in our case, it's literally coming up with a smart cities thing we're doing with Kansas City, Missouri, and with some law schools and MIT and other places. And we already have had some students go from like a law school to like foundation funding and to other places. And it happens a lot in the world when people move from one job to another. First day, last day, onboarding and offboarding is a nightmare. I see dead people all the time on identity jobs. It's like Madison, lots of places that's like not a secret. Like deep provisioning accounts is, we don't do that right because we have not engineered it. And part of that's legal, frankly, just take responsibility. But now, as the web is not a fad. Like it's time to engineer business, legal, and technical processes with the concept that core relationships need to be understandable, they need to be visible, and we need to be able to have levers for managing the relationships that allow for accountability. But more to the point, allow people to make choices and put together new packages, new deals, new value that's reliable, that's legit. I will just show you quickly. This is live demo of code that's still like dripping wet. What will happen, nobody knows. Yeah, clicking the button, nothing's happening. Okay, something's happening. What do you think? Should I authorize it?
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna authorize it. Aha! Oh, that's okay. That's actually supposed to say that. So let's go to my account page. And just refresh that. Haha. The account page. Okay, let's go home first. That was user error, by the way. Actually, did it exactly right. So here we have something. So this is literally looking for my file. I've got Google and not GitHub at this point. I asked them to put a login count, which is coming from Roku, just so people can see, wow, the page is definitely changing, and it is changing. Like this is a real page. Got some stuff we pulled from the profile. I can authorize GitHub from here. But more to the point, look at this little guy here. This is my favorite part. I just click on this and I go, oh, at last, I can see my freaking account for real. I just click that, and here is a file. Here's the path. It's stable. The name, location, blah, blah, blah. My current things are Google true, GitHub false. I think that's pretty good. We can hash that. We can check it up on the blockchain. We can record it. We can have a blast with it. And now let's go ahead and authorize, I will authorize GitHub. So I'll just do it from inside the session. Because, oh, and I'd already sort of given the permission before, so it remembers that I had the permission, I guess. So it should now say that I have both of them authorized. I should have like completely logged out of everything in advance so you can see the permissions. But now on the page, okay, like here are the terms. So I put some placeholder boilerplate stuff up here, but this would be like, like you agree with apps are us, that you own your data, like we're liable for nothing. And but just like a little bit, like a little boilerplate at the top, and then right to the off terms. Because that's the nature, that's the fundamental nature of the deal. That's the sum total of the obligations of parties. That is the contract. Gabby will talk in a moment about how we've encapsulated these into cards. So you can basically legal components, kind of one clause per component. Chuck them in, but here's Google's, like I've authorized Google to do this, I've authorized GitHub to do that. Then we'll have some back matter of the contract at the end, like disputes will be resolved in Bangladesh and whatever. So those will all be cards as well. So that is our dynamic contract. Let's see, so let's now go to, 114. So let's go to Q&A, I think. Actually, what am I forgetting, actually? I did not show the roadmap. Would you like to say anything before? I think Ashley's actually at work right now. He's in India. Oh, there you go. Hello, are you there?
Yeah.
Great.
Hey, Dazza. Hi.
So number one, thank you for coding this, in volunteer spirit. Did I miss anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, definitely. So right now, this prototype is, on this server which runs Node, and you have simple HTML, CSS, and JavaScript in front end, right? And the identity files are on the file system of the server. So people could think of this server as a single point of failure, right? So in the roadmap, we have things like integrating this on IPFS. So IPFS is something which is, hey, does it? Can you hear me?
Yes. I'm just looking for the slides. Sorry.
Okay. So by integrating the ID file onto IPFS, what happens is the file is not on a single system, but it's on a peer-to-peer distributed file system. So this way, there's no single point of failure, and though the server might fail, the ID file is still available on other file systems. So this is one thing that we're doing, and the other thing would be having this dynamic contract on the Ethereum blockchain. So this way, we're not limiting ourselves to the regular web, but also we're moving this infrastructure on the blockchain, which is much more reliable and better. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. So I'm just pulling up, this is the repo here. We've got a whack of issues for something that we just started already, but you can see most of what actually said there on the roadmap, which is just to emphasize if you couldn't hear the signal that well. We're going to be looking for distributed file sharing so that the server is not such a point of failure, especially with just the research implementations we have now, but also, frankly, at larger scale. That's good for resilience, it's good for trustworthiness, it's good for reliability. There's business models there. We're going to be using IPFS. It's a blockchain-based distributed thing. There's also something that Gabriella's discovered at CSAIL called Solid. I guess that's another distributed something that Tim Berners-Lee invented, and it's supposed to be amazing. But hell, we could use GitHub for just distributing the authoritative account files. But so anyway, so distribution of the data is one thing. Another thing is we'll be bringing on more scopes. We'll be bringing on more identity and service providers, so we can really see that dynamic contract. Gabriella worked hard last night at implementing Bootstrap and some material design cards, so we could decouple the front end better from what's happening in the back end and encapsulate those legal terms as true legal components, so that the clauses and the authorizations are humming together in perfect synchronous harmony at last. And what else on the roadmap? Some big things are on the roadmap. We'll be implementing it, so we kind of tore the identity system out of the app that it was being used for so that we can get it right in an OAuth pattern in time for this talk. I think that's been done. Now we'll be reintegrating it with this app, which is called Unworkshop. It's basically just a way that everyone can do ideation at the same time, brainstorm, break things, and actually, if you sequence those the right way, you can do some cool stuff. So we'll be doing that next, reintegrating with that app, and then with a few more apps to make sure we have an identity as a service that's working appropriately. Good Lord, I think that's, the lawyers are coming. So in May we have what we're calling Algorithmic Law Conference, which is also on the roadmap to invent algorithmic law shortly before then, or at the conference, no later than the conference. We'll figure out how to better have data-driven rules and dynamic systems for contracts, maybe to get better analytics on what clauses to pop in, which ones are litigated, which are more performant, better templates, things that work. So you can do a lot of interesting analytics on contracts. And so we're having you're all welcome here to come to the Media Lab May 5th and 6th to an algorithmic law event where we'll basically battle test some of these ideas more fully. And the last thing I'll say is that Gabriella actually kindly agreed to show up at our favorite Tuesday hack night with Code for America at the Cambridge Innovation Center a week from today, and we'll be hacking on iAuth. So anybody that's interested in front end, Gabriella's a genius, frankly, a hard worker, but we can all use some help when it comes to encapsulating legal terms in material design cards like this. And so if anyone's into front end stuff, wants to remake the law by encapsulating it and engineering it like normal people, come on by. Also on the back end, if you would like to work on the Node app and then our migration to Ubuntu, which is important. The proof of concept is not really real until it's just on Ubuntu and or Debian or something like that in the open, and we'll kind of Dockerize different things. But we have to migrate it, or like I feel the baby isn't safe. It's not viable yet until it's just on a normal server with not like the special incubations of Heroku. So those are some of the things that will be happening next on Tuesday night, just up the road, 1 Broadway, 7 p.m. Code for America. Come on by. So with that, I'll hand the mic back to Hetty. Okay.
Cool. I think we have time for 2 questions. So who has a question here? I know I have one, but okay, and Tyson. Okay. Yeah, I think if we just get those the questions at the same time, and then you can answer them, so that we can just make sure we
questions.
end on time. Cool. So what's yours, Tyson? Then I'll send.
So just to summarize, a big goal of this project is to put users in control of their identifying data that they share with third parties, and to make the contracts explicit and human readable.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yep, and so just for our friends that really hacked this, the gentleman confirmed that the main goal is to put users in control of their, and then he said identifiable data, and I say of their identity.
Of their identity.
It's represented by more or less you can think like a title to a car that indicates ownership. But that's right. And then number 2, to make the legal terms more explicit, and that's confirmed.
All right. And so my question is, what is the contract with those third parties after you revoke their access to your data? Are you requiring them legally to delete what they have on hand for you, or is the idea that the data is so dynamic that you're simply revoking continued access? Is that a problem you're trying to address here?
Great. And the question was, what's the deal after revocation with the data on external systems? Are we seeking to control that as well, like have it deleted, for example? And the answer is that's the question that we have to be able to answer at scale. And right now it's a chaotic hot mess, and it's molten hot. It's unanswerable. It's not tractable in my view. The way things are now. My aim with this is to have it be better without changing anything on the terms or expectations of what people do with data, because it's so much better just to use this. It's so much more organized, it's so much more reliable, it's so much more efficient and effective, makes new combinations of packaging of product and compositions of services possible, that it sells itself, and it attracts open source people and other people to add to it. And then the master plan is a new deal and a very old deal on data. Basically the deal in America and the Commonwealth is that we're free people and free markets. I took an oath to defend the Constitution of Massachusetts when I was a lawyer, and it says pretty plainly, it's like on our website, I put it there in 97, mass.gov. It says the deal is that like we're consent to be governed. So the real deal is that we can revoke consent. And that would mean in some cases that if the consent was to have data and revoking it meant in our terms that you delete the data, you delete the data. What it meant is that you didn't delete the data, but you don't get further data, we would see that in the card. And when we revoked it, that would be an auditable logged thing. So the plan is to create an enforceable, engineered basis that people can know the deal, and that I think a competitive market for people that would be willing to delete their data and to say that they'll do that no auth permissions would emerge, and that if some didn't do it for reasons of incompetence, error, evilness, or whatever, we can know that. And now we have something you can easily, almost machinably bring into court for enforcement. We have to go to court. Like you're gonna have liquidated damages. Like, okay, $50 in PayPal, you didn't delete these 5 things, and then look at this span, naughty. So like now we have an enforceable, engineered, scalable basis to address ownership of data. And deletion is the best way to know who owns something. If they can destroy it, they totally own it. So I think you've asked the right question. What was the second question?
Thank you.
You're welcome. What's your name?
Tyson.
Okay, that's a good question. What's the second one?
Cool. My second question is, you mentioned a few people that you're already going to be working with. What makes them so excited about this project, and how did you find them?
Thanks. We have a bunch of like what I would call identirati at MIT, and then actually across America, like mostly in the West Coast, but New York and a bunch of places. Some terrific companies, RSA here, but many like are true innovators of identity services, and they start with what we call a user-centered perspective. So the center of all that goodness is something called Internet Identity Workshop. Meets twice. It's an unconference that meets twice a year in Mountain View, and it's where like all the people really into this, like below IETF, and below W3C, and below like the trade shows. Like that's where we really get together and kind of have it out and have a great time and invent things. Like OpenID Connect came from there. OAuth 2 came from there, from one of the sessions. Like many great things came from there, super upstream. We're inherently interested in identity, those people, and so like we kind of fuel each other. I run something in that group called the Legal Forum, where we've been getting good feedback from people with that, and then also some other standards groups where we've gotten initial feedback. So I found them really just the people I currently hang out with that have been validating it. The real power, though, is with Akshith and with Gabriella and with people that you can't see who have labored as volunteers, that they saw there's an opportunity to do something better. And they basically volunteered, civic hackers, to contribute one way or another to this. And luckily their story isn't unknowable because thanks to GitHub we have commits, and we have issues that go way back across some repositories that we'll be linking. But it was, if Akshith and Gabriella had not, when we were finishing up a blockchain thing, expressed interest and even passion about this, and the sense that they could do it and that it was important to do, and volunteered to do it, late at night when Gabrielle has a great boyfriend that she wasn't with him for at times because she was just putzing around with me on this, and then Akshith has got a job and a bunch of stuff to do. Like we've been volunteering on this for a while, and it was their passion and willingness to volunteer that indicated to me that the time is right. It wasn't ready 2 years ago. I don't think anyone even understood what I was talking about. If people understand it, and people are ready to help, and so I recognize that pattern pretty well. It's something that's time is right, so we're going for it. Also, come to think of it, so like Pivotal Labs, and talking about a tech talk. First, I was going to do a boring buzzword-laden thing because I thought that was what I was supposed to do, and I wasn't even looking forward to it that much. Although I wanted to see what was going on in here, like Pivotal Tracker, and so. But the interest in is it Sean Fun?
Yeah.
When I just said, well, I guess we could. How about iAuth? Because it's been in the back of my head lately. So due to blockchain, things were coming up that suggested it might be time, maybe. And so I just trotted out there, and she's like, her eyes lit up. She's like, our clients have that as an issue. We don't really, there's not a good design pattern. It's interesting to flip the pyramid and put the user at the center. And so she validated it. So I'd say, literally, if it hadn't been for Pivotal Labs, catalyzing the topic with the talk, which then required some kind of demo, this wouldn't be happening. So I'd say those are the three main characters: volunteers, MIT people, and you.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you. Okay. So Gabriella and Akshith, thank you for your being here and for everything you've done. And you can hang out with all of us and hack this into true existence a week from today at Code for America, and we'll put